There is a massive cluster of wide receivers at the top of fantasy football drafts right now. This isn't going to be perfect, but we're going to try our hardest to make some sense out of this here. Starting our tier list off in the S tier, starting with, of course, Jamar Chase from the Cincinnati Bengals, 2024's wide receiver one, coming off a season where he put up 19.9 half PPR points per game, leading all wide receivers. He still has Joe Burrow. It's the exact same situation. As long as Joe Burrow is healthy, Jamar Chase is going to be an elite wide receiver coming out this season one more time. Rolling into our second guy, his buddy, Justin Jefferson. Don't overthink it. I know J.J. McCarthy's a rookie quarterback. We usually don't want to draft wide receivers who are going to be dependent on rookie quarterbacks, but we saw last year Justin Jefferson can make absolutely any quarterback work. Draft him at 2. Do not overthink it. Last year with Sam Darnold, put up 16.2 fantasy points per game. That was tied for wide receiver 2 in terms of points per game. We are going from half PPR because that is, of course, how Underdog best ball scoring format is done. So moving on to our third guy, it's going to be CeeDee Lamb from the Dallas Cowboys. CeeDee Lamb finishing the season as wide receiver 5, putting up 14.2 points per game. Dealt with a lot of injuries. Dak Prescott will be back this year. Don't overthink CeeDee Lamb. I know George Pickens was added to that lineup. He's a significantly different wide receiver than what CeeDee Lamb is. It does hurt CeeDee in terms of he will most likely not be finishing wide receiver 1 again now that there is another fetching targets in that offense. But we see with the Cincinnati Bengals and Jamar Chase is still wide receiver 1, even though he has another wide receiver who is very good in that offense with him. So we are very confident in CeeDee Lamb, even with Dak Prescott coming off of an injury. Moving on to the final player I have here in our S tier, it's going to be Malik Neighbors from the New York Giants, putting up 14.6 points per game in half PPR leagues as a rookie. Extremely impressive. This year, the quarterbacking can only be better. And even if it's not better, he finished last year as wide receiver 7 on the season. Malik Neighbors is just one of the best prospects we've seen in recent memories. Do not hesitate to take this guy. I love his ADP at wide receiver 5. Obviously, I have him at wide receiver 4 currently, so I do like him a little bit higher than the market has him. But when we're looking at this crop of wide receivers, it's pretty much take whoever you want once you get past Jamar Chase, really. Even the rest of these guys are kind of in like an S1, SB, S2 tier, with Jamar Chase S1 and then the other 3 guys in S2. Before we move on to our A tier here, on Underdog, there are 12 teams per draft, meaning just running the numbers randomly, your team has about a 16% chance of moving on to the second round to make some money. Just last year, my teams moved on 26.9% of the time, meaning that using my strategies, I was able to make my teams 1.68 times more successful than average. So if you want to learn some of these strategies, please hit that subscribe button. I promise you will learn a ton about fantasy football. But let's get into our next tier, our A tier. It's going to be led off by Mr. Puka Nacua, the current Underdog Fantasy Football wide receiver 4, coming off of a very successful season, not successful finish-wise, but still very, very, very high scoring points per game wise. Puka Nacua finishing a wide receiver 23, but still put up 15.2 fantasy points per game, which was top 10 on the season. We know Puka Nacua is on a fantastic offense. He is an elite wide receiver. The reason why I don't have him in the S tier is because his team has now picked up Davante Adams going over to the LA Rams in free agency. Yes, Puka Nacua was elite with Cooper Kupp, but it was the ghost of Cooper Kupp. The analytics, the way Davante Adams is trending, we are not expecting him to fall off a cliff just yet. So this year, that's bad for Puka Nacua, the fact that Davante Adams is in that offense, and it limits Puka Nacua's ceiling. Moving on to our next guy, another guy on a fantastic offense who is a really, really strong wide receiver. That's Amon-Ra St. Brown. Amon-Ra St. Brown is coming off a wide receiver 3 finish, putting up 15.5 fantasy points per game. Highly impressive stuff. The reason why he is also not in my S tier is because there are too many other targets in that offense. Jameson Williams, Sam Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs, even David Montgomery gets some targets as well. And that's not even to mention if they bring in another wide receiver or, just throw to any other random wide receivers. So there just isn't there's a big pie to go around. There's a lot of yards, a lot of touchdowns. The problem is there are a ton of mouths to feed in that Detroit Lions offense. Yes, Amon-Ra St. Brown is still elite. That's just the reason why he isn't in my S tier. if you want to say, even with all those mouths to feed, he put up a wide receiver 3 season last year. I can't fight you on that. Go ahead and draft him however high you want. Obviously, we know from the looking at what his stats have been the last couple of years, Amon-Ra St. Brown is an elite fantasy football wide receiver. Now, moving on to one of our newer elite fantasy football wide receivers, going to be 2024's wide receiver 26, Nico Collins. Last season, he put up 14.9 half PPR points per game. The reason why his finish was a little bit lower is because he dealt with some injuries. He's had some injury problems early in his career, but if he's able to stay healthy with CJ Stroud, that stack is going to be a very profitable stack to have in fantasy football. CJ Stroud, you would, of course, be drafting him as like your quarterback 2, not a quarterback 1 because he doesn't have the rushing upside, but we know even when they're bringing in Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins, both rookie wide receivers from Iowa State, Nico Collins was easily the wide receiver 1 with a healthy Tank Dell and a pre-torn ACL Stephon Diggs, and Nico Collins was easily the best wide receiver still in that offense. I promise you he's going to be better than Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, even if Jaden Higgins' pro comp is Nico Collins. Next wide receiver on the list going to be Jacksonville Jaguars wide receiver Brian Thomas Jr. You may be wondering, why does last year's wide receiver 4 overall, how is he not in the S tier? You look at historically the wide receivers to put up a season the way Brian Thomas Jr. just put up his season, it's just elite guys. It's Jamar Chase, Malik Neighbors, elite stuff. Those guys don't have one of the best wide receiver prospects in recent memory coming to their offense in Travis Hunter. Travis Hunter is an absolute superstar in the making and could turn Brian Thomas Jr. into the wide receiver 2 in Jacksonville. That being said, Brian Thomas Jr., I still have him in the A tier, still expect him to be an extremely productive wide receiver for fantasy football. Putting up 14.2 points per game last year in half PPR leagues is especially impressive when you remember the fact that Trevor Lawrence was injured at the end of the season and he was catching passes from it was Mac Jones. It was Mac Jones. Let's just call it like it is. Mac Jones is not a good NFL quarterback. Trevor Lawrence is going to be better for Brian Thomas Jr., but the addition of Travis Hunter greatly limits Brian Thomas Jr.'s ceiling. Although a wide receiver, another top 5 finish for Brian Thomas Jr. is of course not impossible. That's why I still have him in the A tier, but I can't put him any higher than that. Moving on, closing out our A tier, we're going to finish it with Philadelphia Eagles wide receiver 1, PFF's number 1 graded. PFF called AJ Brown the number 1 wide receiver in football. While I think that's laughable, he's still an A tier wide receiver in fantasy. Last season put up wide receiver 14 finish, averaging 14.1 points per game. This is another offense with a lot of mouths to feed in the Philadelphia Eagles offense with Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, and then Jalen Hurts is going to be running the ball a lot, as well as not throwing the ball as much as a lot of other teams in this tier. Obviously, the Rams, Lions, and Texans all throwing the ball more than the Philadelphia Eagles, and none of those teams are going to be checking it down more than the Philadelphia Eagles will to Saquon Barkley. However, AJ Brown, probably the most talented wide receiver in this group. If you were someone who takes the best wide receiver on the field if you like drafting really good real life players as opposed to really good fantasy players, AJ Brown should be the guy that you want to target in this tier. He is the best wide receiver in this tier for real life, but I mean, Pro Football Focus, wide receiver 1, what are we talking about? Justin Jefferson exists. Finishing this off with our B tier, we're going to start it off with T. Higgins. Yes, T. Higgins is an elite wide receiver, even with being the second wide receiver in his own offense. T. Higgins actually was tied with Justin Jefferson for the second most fantasy points per game in the NFL last year. That is insane and just shows how good Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals offense is for wide receivers in terms of fantasy football success. T. Higgins is someone, he is not going to finish wide receiver 1, but he can still finish very high. The problem with T. Higgins is he absolutely loves getting injured. I mean, the dude can never finish a whole season. That's why he finished as a wide receiver 18 on the season last year, even though he was wide receiver 2 in terms of points per game. Although a lot of the wide receivers who finished above him, like Jackson Smith and Jigba, Drake London, and Garrett Wilson, they averaged significantly less points per game. The reasons why they finished so much higher is because they were able to stay healthy. Now, you can also argue the best ability is availability, and T. Higgins needs to stay healthy, and I would say yes. But at the same time, injuries are just unlucky in the NFL, and any given year, one guy can get injured while another guy doesn't get injured. We are going to be assuming that no one gets hurt and drafting the best guys like that. That's really all we can do, unless it's a guy who is severely injury prone. But if people went into last year and were okay with drafting injury prone running backs and picked that injury prone running back at the 1-2 turn in Saquon Barkley, you're probably feeling pretty good about yourself right now. Moving on to our next guy in our B tier here, our second to last elite wide receiver. It's going to be Drake London. And we have some stuff to talk about when it comes to Drake London. Currently coming off the board at Underdog wide receiver 9. I think that's a pretty solid spot for him. Finished as wide receiver 9 on the season last year, but he only averaged 12.2 fantasy points per game. So if he only averaged 12.2 points per game, why do I have him as an elite wide receiver for this season? And the reason for that is Michael Penix Jr. is now the full-time starting quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons after finishing the year as a starting quarterback for the Falcons last season. He started the last 3 games for Drake London, and when Michael Penix Jr. was the starting quarterback of the Atlanta Falcons, Drake London averaged 19.4 half PPR points per game. Am I saying he is now going to do that for a full season? Absolutely not. But can he average 14.5, 15.5? Absolutely. I know that Carolina game was a big boom game that boosted his points per game by a lot, and that the points will fluctuate. The thing that carries over between seasons when it comes to wide receivers and pass catchers in fantasy football is targets. And if we look at the amount of targets that Drake London got from Michael Penix Jr. over his 3 starts for the Atlanta Falcons in 2024, they were as follows. Against the Giants, he had 8 targets, Washington Commanders, 13 targets, Carolina Panthers, 18 targets. That is a ton of targets. That's more than 12 targets per game. That has wide receiver top 10 finish written all over it. Drake London, even though his points per game were lower last season, I have the utmost confidence that he will be a even more profitable draft pick this season. Now, we're going to finish off this list with a guy who is being drafted significantly later than everyone else on this list. Rashee Rice is coming off the board at wide receiver 16 on Underdog Fantasy Football. But the more research you do on this guy, the more he looks like the absolute best value that there is in fantasy football. Last season, Rashee Rice finished as a wide receiver 96, which is of course terrible. But if you look at his points per game in the games that he actually didn't get injured in, so the games that he played from the beginning of the game to the end of the game, Rashee Rice averaged 17.6 half PPR points per game. That is absolutely insane. That has top 5 wide receiver if this guy can stay healthy for the entire season, which of course he can't if his own quarterback is out trying to injure him. But what we're seeing is he is coming back strong from this injury. We are already getting videos from training camp of him running routes, looking good in ladder drills and doing other stuff like that. I don't expect him to be as good as he was last year, but we have to remember this is not a player who relies on his athleticism to score fantasy points. Rashee Rice, he doesn't have to go super deep like Jameson Williams and get all that speed. He doesn't have to break people down like Cooper Kupp. All he has to do is play like Amon-Ra St. Brown, where he gets designed touches, and he's on a really good offense in the Kansas City Chiefs. So there is a lot of touchdown upside for Rashee Rice. He can, if he is healthy for the entire year, he can be a wide receiver 1, even with that injury that he's currently rehabbing. The other problem is he has some legal issues off the field. The news on that, it seems like it is going so slow that he might get another season to fully play before he even gets docked with that suspension that we know is coming. There's a guarantee that Rashee Rice will be suspended. The question mark is, will he be suspended this year or next year? Right now, the reports are leaning towards next year. If Rashee Rice gets through these legal injuries, or Rashee Rice is not suspended this year and comes back healthy, he will be an absolute league winner. And currently, his ADP on Underdog of wide receiver 16 is still a steal. Terry McLaurin also looks like a very good pick at this price, but Rashee Rice could be someone who could absolutely win you your league should you spend a draft pick on him. Rashee Rice, every week, it has been going up in ADP. He's someone who I would recommend loading up on now, closer to the season, when his stuff is more figured out. One of two things is going to happen. Either he's going to be suspended and absolutely plummet down rankings, or what all of our information is telling us right now is going to happen. He is not going to get suspended, and he is going to skyrocket into the top 10 in these Underdog Fantasy Football drafts, and then we are not going to want to draft him as much. What we want to do is make sure we are loading up on him now, so then when he goes higher in ADP, closer to the season, we're able to spend those draft picks on someone else who is a better value at the time. Now, before I put this ADP graph down, I just got to say, please don't take Marvin Harrison Jr. at wide receiver 14. His rookie season was not a flop as far as rookies go. For him, his expectations were ridiculous, so it was. But don't take him at wide receiver 14. He doesn't deserve that. But if you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and have a great day.